Okay. Welcome back to the Is What episode, all about nuclear explosions. So now that we've laid the groundwork, let's go ahead and let's jump into the story tale of the Chernobyl incident. So on Saturday, April 26, 1986, about 1:23:58 seconds in the morning, the number 4 reactor in the Chernobyl power plant, there was, needless to say, an incident. Or you could call it a massive explosion that is widely known as the worst nuclear meltdown in the history of mankind. Now, Chernobyl was located near the Ukrainian city of Pripyat, in the northern part of Ukraine. And it was home at one point to about 14,000 people. Now is only home to almost 700 in what they call the Chernobyl exclusion zone. As I said, this is known as the worst nuclear disaster in history of humans. So the number of deaths that are currently attributed to the Chernobyl incident was 31 at the initial blast, and as many as 50 due to immediate radiation exposure. In 2005, the BBC reported that the United Nations and World Health Organization have predicted a further nearly 4,000 deaths as a result of after effects of this radiation exposure and radiation poisoning. Radioactive clouds swept all through Europe and Siberia and were noted as far away as Sweden at the time. So the World Health Organization actually estimates 7,700 square miles of Europe were contaminated by this radiation cloud that really swept through Europe. And thousands of people are now exposed to radiation on the initial day. And these thousands of people were deemed high risk by the World Health Organization and high risk to get cancer in their lifetime, strictly because of the proximity between them and this Chernobyl event and the meltdown of reactor number 4 in the Chernobyl power plant. So we had 14,000 people that were living in and around the city Pripyat, and they were all completely displaced. And many of the people that were displaced were actually not told the truth about the severity of their exposure. And a lot of these people died of cancer later, and this is all due to an attempted cover-up by the USSR, not wanting to admit fault, not wanting to admit that they were wrong. And I'll actually cover some of the cover-up and some of the quotes by people who attempted to recover documents after everything happened. But with that said, let's go ahead and let's just jump into what happened with Chernobyl and really what caused this massive explosion and the subsequent nuclear fallout. And yeah, I really am going to try my best to explain this, and I will, full disclosure, let you all know, if you're not surprised, I am not a nuclear engineer. And what happened here really is very, very, very complex, but I'm going to try to break it down to the best of my knowledge. From the research that I've done, I tried to keep it as simple as possible. I've read a handful of articles, I've watched some videos on this, so I'll try to break it down in the best way possible for you to really listen, take it in, and know what had occurred. So according to the World Nuclear Association, the staff of the Chernobyl power plant were attempting to run a test of this plant to see that if their plant loses power, will there be enough energy to keep the coolant pumps running until the emergency generator kicks on. Now, you always need this coolant pump to continue to run. It's significant because if the power plant completely loses power and the coolant pumps can't keep running, then the risk of a complete meltdown is 100% if they lose power. If there's an earthquake, a significant storm, something like that happens, and they cannot continue to cool the nuclear reactor until the emergency power kicks on, you're in a lot of trouble. So they had run this test before, And on a handful of occasions, every time when they do the test, they actually failed the test, which points to a bigger problem and is a meltdown waiting to happen. So while they're running this test to see if they could actually sustain power due to a power outage, they would turn the reactor down from 100% capacity to 25% capacity. So that way it's running at much lower levels so they can try this test and hopefully successfully. But when they turned the power down, instead of dropping to 25%, it dropped all the way down to 1%, as if it wasn't on. And this is not enough power for them to actually see if this test is going to work and see if they can actually keep power going long enough for these emergency generators to kick in and really keep everybody alive and avoid a meltdown. So naturally, if you try to drop the power to 25% and it goes down to 1, what are you going to do? You want to normalize this. So turn it back up to 1, or from 1 to 25. So as they increase the power, there was a power spike because this actually normalized. The drop in power was just momentary, but they were so antsy to kick this off and make sure that this test is going to work. They cranked the power back up. And with that power spike, the reactor capacity rose and rose and rose. And eventually it hit 100%. And that power surge caused the emergency shutdown to completely fail. So at this point now you have a nuclear reactor that is running at 100% with no emergency shutdown. So as soon as that happened, I guess you can say that reactor didn't react very well. Thank you very much. I will be here all week. So as soon as that happened, the reactor started to shake and move up and down, left and right, as if there was an earthquake going on. So naturally, the engineers who were working saw this happen and they ran away. So they booked it. They just took off. And as soon as the water pumps had failed, there was no water to then flow into this reactor core, which caused the fuel rods to heat very significantly, which starts the meltdown. So as soon as this cool water actually hits the rods, even though it wasn't cooling the core, it was still able to hit the rods. The rods heat up, and this cool water hits, which causes a massive amount of steam to then be produced. And the steam keeps building and building and building. And what happened was the top blew off. So there you go. You have an explosion because there was nowhere for the steam to go. And there it is. Radiation for all. But that was just the tip of the iceberg, if you will, on this. Because as soon as the top blows off and the radiation starts to go out and the steam is leaving the nuclear reactor, then you have air that flows in, that hits the reactor, which hits the graphite, and the graphite is caused to then catch fire because of a chemical reaction, which is clearly no bueno at this point as soon as the graphite catches fire. Now, that caused a significantly larger explosion that hurled debris everywhere. And then the fuel starts going everywhere, and there's fires everywhere, left and right, and it is, in a word, would be mayhem.